The number on my kitchen table had not moved since 9:30 the previous evening. 406 returns confirmed as filed. 406 at 10, 406 at midnight, 406 at 20 to 4 in the morning, while I sat there in a dressing gown with the laptop fan screaming and the heating not yet on. On the day before a quarterly deadline, that number should have been climbing every 90 seconds. We usually watched it the way other people watch a football score. It sat there like a dead thing. What made it worse was that the customer screens were beautiful. I had a second window open with a test account belonging to a haulage firm in Bootle, and their dashboard was green from top to bottom. Every consignment note reconciled. Every tonnage line matched. A little tick beside the words, ready to file, that we had spent 2 weeks getting the color right on. I refreshed it 11 times, and it told me 11 times that everything was fine, and the whole time my other screen said that nothing had gone anywhere. My phone went off at 4:08, and it was not one of ours. It was a woman called Deirdre, who runs our support desk, and who has never in 6 years rung me before 6. She had a customer on the other line, a transfer station in Dagenham, and their operations manager had driven in at 3 in the morning because his own compliance officer could not sleep and had gone in to check, and the screen said filed, and the regulator's portal said nothing had been received from them since the previous morning. Deirdre said, very calmly, in the voice she uses when she is not calm, "Callum, he's asking me who to ring at the agency, and I don't know what to tell him, because our screen agrees with him and yours doesn't." I said, "Give me 10 minutes. Behind me on the stairs I could hear my son Theo awake, because he is always awake, doing the thing where he counts the banister spindles under his breath. There are 2 of us on the product that waste firms file their quarterly returns through. Me and a woman called Orla, who has been there longer, who keeps a paper notebook out of some deep distrust of everything we build. Around 4,000 small and medium firms in the country use it. Skip hire outfits and clinical waste couriers and transfer stations, and one enormous customer who took 9 months to sign. If we go down on an ordinary Tuesday, nobody dies and nobody notices. If we go down in the last week of a quarter, 4,000 companies file late. And filing late is a fixed penalty per firm, plus a note on their permit record that sits there for 3 years. My son starts at a specialist unit in September, 2 afternoons of speech therapy and 1 of occupational therapy a week, and none of it is free. And the money is exactly why I had been quietly agitating for the promotion that my boss had been quietly sitting on. That is the whole of my personal situation, and I am not going to dwell on it. The thing my working life actually hung on was the nightly run. Every night at 11:30 the product walked through every customer's data, line by line, and did what everyone in the building called the strict check. It compared every waste code against the regulator's current list. It compared every tonnage against the limits on that firm's permit. It compared what you were about to file against what you had already filed, so you did not send the same load twice, which is the single most common way a small firm gets themselves in trouble. It was slow. God, it was slow. For a big customer with 40 vehicles, it took the better part of an hour. And there was a period in my life where I could tell you the run time of the 12 worst offenders from memory. And because it was slow, the screens did not wait for it. The screens read from a saved copy of everybody's numbers that our platform engineer, Dermot, had built 2 years earlier, so that a page load took a quarter of a second instead of 40 seconds. The strict check was the thing that threw that saved copy away and wrote a fresh one at the end of every night. That was the deal. Slow thing runs, slow thing bins yesterday, fast screens get today. I did not think of it as fragile. I thought of it as a chain, and I had never once in 2 years watched anyone unhook a link. My boss was called Grant. In my own head, and only in my own head, he was the weather vane, because he pointed wherever the last conversation had blown him. He had a habit when he was about to refuse you of pressing his thumb hard into the bridge of his nose and holding it there, eyes closed, like he was fighting off a headache he had personally decided to have 30 seconds earlier. I want to be fair to the man, because he did drive Orla to hospital once at 2 in the afternoon with her hand wrapped in a tea towel, and he sat there for 5 hours, and he never mentioned it again. He knew all our kids' names. He asked about Theo by name. That is a real thing, and I am not going to pretend it away. The demo was in March. Holbrook Waste, National, for 100 vehicles, the account that was going to double our revenue and had already been promised to the board twice. Grant had them coming into the office on a Thursday, in person, 6 of their people including a finance director, and he had built a 40-minute walkthrough around our dashboard. The rehearsal on the Tuesday was where it fell over. He clicked into the Holbrook trial account, which we had loaded with a copy of their real operational data, and the screen sat there with a spinner on it. 11 seconds. Then a page. Then he clicked through to the tonnage breakdown, and it sat there again, 19 seconds this time, and he made a noise in his throat like a car failing to start. He said, "It cannot do that. Not with 6 of them watching." I explained it, and I explained it the way I would explain it to my mother. I said the reason it is slow is that this account is new, so there is no saved copy of their numbers yet, so every screen is calculating from scratch. I said once the strict check has run overnight a couple of times, the copy exists and it will be instant. I said, "We have 2 nights, let it run. On Thursday morning it will be quick." Grant said, "It didn't get quick last night." That was true, and it was true because the Holbrook data was enormous and the run had not finished before we all came in. So he asked the question I have replayed roughly 900 times since. He asked whether we could just turn the slow check off. I said yes. Technically, there is a setting. We turn it off for one account when we are debugging, and I have used it maybe 4 times. He said fine, turn it off for Holbrook. And then, because Orla was in the room and Orla is incapable of leaving a thing half said, she pointed out that the setting was not per account for the overnight run, only for on-demand refreshes, and that if he wanted the whole thing quick on Thursday morning, the practical way was to turn the strict check off across the board for 2 nights. I said no. I said it fairly loudly. And this is the part one need you to have in plain English, because everything after this is just consequences. I said, the strict check is not only a check. It is the thing that throws away the saved copy of everyone's numbers. It is the only thing that throws it away. That copy has no expiry date on it. Nothing else in the entire product ever goes and clears it out. If you switch off the check, the copy just sits there forever, and every screen every customer looks at will keep showing them yesterday. And it will look completely normal, because a stale screen and a fresh screen are the same screen. There was a pause and Grant did the thumb thing. I shut and said, "For 2 nights." I said, "For 2 nights, fine, mostly, in March, nowhere near a deadline. But it has to go back on Friday morning, or people will be looking at old numbers and believing them." He said, "Obviously." And then he said the thing that I did not clock at the time as a decision, only as a manner. And let's not do this in the group chat, because half this company doesn't understand what a demo is, and I'm not spending Wednesday reassuring people. Ines, our tester, was sitting at the end of the table with her laptop closed, which is how she listens. She had one question, and it was, who owns turning it back on? Grant said he did. She wrote that down. 20 minutes after we came out, Ines messaged me and asked me to put in writing, to her, what specifically was being switched off and what the effect on the screens was. I typed 4 sentences. She replied with a thumbs up and nothing else, which from Ines is roughly a standing ovation. Orla was less restrained. She stood in the doorway of the little room where we keep the printer and said, "He's going to forget." I said he won't. He's got Holbrook to close. He's not going to leave the safety net off with that lot going live. She looked at me the way you look at a man who has just explained that his dog would never eat the sandwich. The demo went perfectly. Every screen instant, Grant absolutely at his best, funny and specific, the finance director laughing twice. They signed in April. There was a card that went round. I chased the strict check twice. Once on the Friday, in person, and Grant said yes, next week, because switching it back on meant the first night's run would have 3 days of unchecked filings to walk through and would take about 11 hours, and that would slow the screens down during Holbrook's onboarding week. That was, annoyingly, a real reason. And once in April, by message, and he replied with a thumbs up and a note that we would do it in a quiet window. In May, Dermot moved off our area onto the storage work and stopped being the person who noticed things about the saved copy at 11 at night. In June, a junior on the platform side, a lad called Femi who is genuinely good and who did nothing wrong, went through our settings screen removing options that nothing referenced anymore, and one of the ones he took out was the switch for the strict check, because as far as the code was concerned it had been sitting in the off position for 3 months and nobody had touched it. He wrote it up properly. Nobody objected, including me, because I read the list at 4:30 on a Friday, and my brain read the words and used settings. Somewhere in there, I was reorganizing the on-call rota and needed a maintenance window that did not clash with anything. So I had the shared team calendar open on my second screen for about an hour, scrolling through Fridays. There was a standing entry every Friday at 4 called Strict Check, back on. Grant's name on it, with a little note under it, and every week the colored block had been dragged forward to the next Friday. He had moved it that morning while I was looking at it. I found my window on the Tuesday, booked it, closed the tab, and got on with my day. Nobody looked at the saved copy again until the 27th of September. The support line opened at 8, and by 10 past 8 Deirdre had 11 calls stacked, all of them saying the same thing in different accents. My screen says it's filed. The agency says it isn't. I was already in the office by then, having driven in at 5:30 with a Twix for breakfast, and Orla arrived at 10 to 7 with her hair still wet, and did not say good morning, just, how far back? That was the right question, and I had spent 90 minutes on it. Every night since March the run had walked through the filings and pushed them to the regulator's gateway, and every night it had done that off the saved copy of the data, and the saved copy of the data had not been thrown away since the 15th of March. So it had spent 6 months pushing the same reconciled totals, and the gateway had been rejecting them as duplicates, quietly, one line at a time, into a response we logged and nobody read, because nothing had failed loudly enough to page anyone. Anything a customer entered new never made it into the copy, so it never made it into a filing. So on the deadline day, the returns that had actually landed with the regulator were the ones from March. 406 of them, which was the number of customers who had happened to have a return accepted in that 15th of March window before we pulled the plug. The screen said filed because the screens read the saved copy, and the saved copy said filed. It had said filed since March. Nothing ever expired it. That is the whole disaster in one sentence, and I said it out loud 8 or 9 times that day, and it never once got easier to say. Corinne, our CTO, came in at 7:30, put her bag down without taking her coat off, and asked me to say it again more slowly, which I did, at the whiteboard, with a marker that was dying. When I finished, she said, "So the tick on their dashboard is a photograph of March," Orla said. Yes. The room filled the way those rooms always fill, one person at a time, nobody sitting down. Femi came in and went very pale when he understood which setting he had removed, and I told him twice that it was not his, and I meant it. Ines arrived with her laptop already open. Deirdre stayed at her desk because her phone did not stop, and every so often you would hear her voice go up at the end of a sentence, which is what happens when a customer starts shouting. Grant came in at 20 past 8. I have never seen a man's face be that color and still be a face. He stood in the doorway with his coat on and said, "Right. What are the options?" Option 1 was the obvious one. Turn the strict check back on. Run it. Let it rebuild everything correctly. File properly before midnight. Except the setting no longer existed anywhere you could click, so it meant writing it back into the product and shipping that change, which we did, me and Orla, side by side, by 10 past 9, the fastest and worst piece of work I have ever done. And then we started the run and watched the estimate. It had 6 months of accumulated filings to walk through and validate before it would produce anything new. 31 hours. We stared at that number for a while. The deadline was midnight. Option 2 was to throw the saved copy away by hand and let the screens rebuild from the live data, at least so customers could see the truth and file manually through the agency's own portal. The safe way to purge it was a tool Dermot had written, and Dermot was the only person who had ever run it in anger, because the last time anyone tried it without him, they took the copy out from under a running job, and every customer saw zeros across the board for 40 minutes. So we rang Dermot. His phone went to a recorded message, a woman's voice, not his. Orla found the retreat. He was 2 days into a 10-day silent retreat in a converted farmhouse in mid-Wales. No phone, no laptop. Handed both in at the door. There was a landline. A very kind man answered it and explained, without any judgment whatsoever, that they did not interrupt, that notes were passed at mealtimes, that the next one was at 12:30, and that whether to break silence was the guest's own decision and they would not be advising him either way. Corinne asked if we could speak to him if it was an emergency, and the man said, gently, "Is anybody hurt?" And Corinne said no, and the man said, "Then we'll pass the note at 12:30. Grant said, to nobody, "He's on a what?" We did it ourselves. Orla cleared the copy for one customer, a mid-sized firm in Preston, as a test, and we watched their dashboard. It went blank, which was correct, and then it filled straight back up with the same March numbers within about 90 seconds, which was not. That was the second thing nobody had thought about. The piece of the product that rebuilds the copy does not go back to the raw filings. It copies from a second save layer that Dermot had put in underneath for speed, and that layer had also never expired, because the only thing that had ever cleared it out was, again, the strict check. We had 2 photographs of March stacked on top of each other. Orla put her forehead on the desk for exactly 3 seconds, and then sat up and started working out how to clear both. By 11:30, we had a way to clear both, for one customer at a time, taking about 4 minutes each, including the rebuild. There were 3,980 firms with an outstanding return. Ines did the arithmetic on paper, which felt like something out of a different century, and said, 265 hours. Nobody replied. Option 3 was to file on the customer's behalf directly with the agency, from the correct data, skipping our own screens entirely. That was the one I actually had hoped for, and I spent from noon until 2 on it with a phone wedged against my shoulder. The gateway takes filings from the account that owns them, and our credentials only let us submit on behalf of firms who had ticked the agent box, which was about a third of them. And the gateway is not live. It takes a batch and processes it overnight, and anything submitted after 6 in the evening lands the following day, which for a midnight deadline is late by definition. I got a very decent woman on their technical support line who listened to me for 4 minutes and then said, "I'm going to be honest with you. We get one of these every quarter, and the answer's always the same." I asked about an extension. She said extensions are ministerial and they take 11 weeks. The note reached Dermot at 12:30. He broke silence at 20-1. His voice on the phone was flat and slow, like a man talking underwater, and the first thing he said was, "How long has nothing been expiring it?" I said since March. There was a pause long enough that I thought the line had gone. Then he said, "Right," and talked me through the purge, both layers, and a way to batch it across customers that have the time. And he stayed on the line for 2 hours 40 from a farmhouse corridor. And then he said he was going to go and sit down, and hung up. We got through 1,100 firms before midnight. The other 2,880 filed late. Corinne booked a room for 8 the next morning and put 6 names on it. Grant, me, Orla, Ines, Deirdre, and herself. Not a call, a room, the one with the long table and the window that does not open. She started with, "Walk me through how we got here." She was not shouting. She has never shouted in my hearing, and it is significantly worse. Grant went first, because he always goes first. He said this was a chain of small failures across 2 teams over 6 months, that nobody had monitoring on the filing acceptance rate, which was true and was mostly my fault, and that there had been a settings cleanup in June by someone on the platform side that removed a control nobody understood. Femi was not in the room, and I said so. And I said the cleanup was reviewed, and I reviewed it. Grant said he wasn't blaming anyone, in a tone that was, and then he moved on. Corinne asked when the strict check was switched off. Grant said March, for the Hallbrook demo, as an emergency measure, and here was where he started to build. He said it was meant to be for 2 nights. He said, the intention was always to put it back on immediately. He said he had assumed it had gone back on, because that is the kind of thing that goes back on, and that he was not the person who would have done it, and he did not have visibility into whether it had happened. Orla said, quite quietly, "You told us not to put it in the group chat." He said that was about not derailing the demo week, and that he stood by it. Second round, he said, and he leaned forward when he said it, hands flat on the table. If anybody had raised it with me at any point after March, at any point, I would have had it back on within a day. That's not me being difficult. Nobody put anything in front of me. There was nothing in place, no process, nothing on my desk. If you're telling me this thing sat off for 6 months, then I'm telling you nobody told me. Deirdre looked at the table. Ines looked at me. I had my laptop open in front of me because I had spent the night on it. I had the shared calendar up because I had gone looking at 4 in the morning for the date of the rehearsal, and I had found the other thing on the way past, and I had sat in the dark looking at it for a long time. I turned the laptop around and slid it into the middle of the table so it faced Corinne and Grant both. That's your calendar invite. You've moved it 41 times. Nobody said anything for a bit. Corinne pulled the laptop the last few inches towards her and read it out, because she is the sort of person who makes a thing official by saying it in the room. Every Friday at 4. Owner, Grant. Title, strict check. back on. And the description, for lines of it, that he had typed himself on the 16th of March and never once edited. That the check had been disabled across all customers on his authority for the Holbrook demonstration. That turning it back on was his call, and not the development team's. And a final line about not raising it in the group chat until he had spoken to the board. She read the last line twice. Then she looked up and asked him when he had last moved it. And he said he did not know. And she said, the 26th of September. At 4:30 in the afternoon. Grant reached for the water jug and got his hand about halfway there and stopped, and left it there on the table, not holding anything. Corinne said, you've been dragging it forward for 6 months. Every Friday you looked at it, and you knew. He said, and his voice broke in the middle of the sentence on the word every. I didn't read it. It was just a block. You stopped seeing your own calendar. That, I believe. I think that is the truest thing he said in that room, and it did not help him at all. He was gone within the month, not sacked in front of anyone. Just a note from Corinne about him moving on, and a leaving thing that 11 people went to, and I did not. The company paid the late filing penalties for every customer who asked, which cost more than the Holbrook contract brought in that year. Holbrook stayed, which none of us understood. Corinne moved the product under her directly and made me and Orla joint leads on it. And she did the money in the same conversation, backdated to July, which was Grant's promotion sitting in a drawer since spring. I did the arithmetic in the car park on my phone before I drove home. It covered the 2 afternoons and the occupational therapy with about 40 pounds a month spare. Theo started at the unit on the 8th of September. I took the morning off and stood in a corridor that smelled of poster paint while a woman called Bryony, who runs the speech sessions and who has an enormous laugh, crouched down to his level and said, right you. Show me what you can do.